Most people think love is proven by words. They think if someone says, I miss you, I care about you, or I love you, then that must be enough. But when you are dealing with an avoidant, words can be comforting, seductive, even convincing, and still mean very little on their own. Because the truth is, words are easy. Words are safe. Words can be offered from a distance. Words can create the feeling of intimacy without requiring the actual risk of intimacy. And for an avoidant, that difference is everything. An avoidant often learns early in life that closeness comes with danger, that needing people creates pain, that vulnerability leads to disappointment, rejection, or loss of control. So they adapt. They become self-contained. They become emotionally efficient. They learn how to care without fully opening, how to connect without fully surrendering, how to keep one foot in and one foot out so they are never completely exposed. And because of that, many avoidants become incredibly skilled at giving just enough affection to keep the connection alive, just enough warmth to create hope, just enough language to make you believe something deeper is growing. But love is not proven by how beautifully someone can express emotion. Love is proven by what they are willing to risk for it. That is the line. That is the difference. That is the moment everything becomes real. Because an avoidant can tell you they care and still disappear when things get too intimate. They can tell you that you matter and still shut down the moment emotional accountability is required. They can tell you they have never felt this way before and still retreat the second the connection asks more of them than comfort allows. Why? Because words do not threaten their defense system. Words do not require surrender. Words do not force them to confront the deepest fear beneath avoidance, the fear that if they truly let someone in, they may lose control, lose safety, or lose themselves. Real love begins the moment they risk that. Anyway, that is the proof, not the intensity of what they say, not the passion in the moment, not the rare burst of vulnerability that disappears the next day. The real proof is when they begin doing what their nervous system has spent years trying to avoid. They stay in the hard conversation. They do not vanish after emotional closeness. They tell the truth even when it makes them uncomfortable. They stop managing connection through distance and start participating in it with presence. That is not casual. That is not accidental. That is not performance. That is risk. And risk is the clearest evidence of love an avoidant can give. Because for someone who has built their identity around emotional self-protection, risk is not small. Risk is terrifying. Risk means saying what they really feel instead of what keeps them safe. Risk means remaining present when their instinct is to shut down. Risk means allowing you to see confusion, fear, need, tenderness, and uncertainty, the very parts of themselves they have spent years hiding, not just from others but often from themselves. Risk means giving up the illusion of control that has made them feel protected for most of their life. That is why when an avoidant starts risking comfort for connection, something real is happening. When they choose the hard conversation instead of withdrawal, that is risk. When they feel overwhelmed but communicate instead of disappearing, that is risk. When they admit they are scared, confused, attached, or affected by you instead of pretending they are untouched, that is risk. When they stop trying to appear invulnerable and start letting you see what is real, that is risk. And when someone who has spent years treating emotional distance as survival begins risking that survival pattern to stay close to you, you are no longer witnessing attraction. You are witnessing transformation. And transformation is where genuine love begins. Because anyone can enjoy you. Anyone can desire you. Anyone can be drawn to your energy, your beauty, your presence, your comfort, or the way you make them feel. But genuine love costs something. It asks for sacrifice. It asks for exposure. It asks for truth. And the clearest sign that an avoidant feels something real is not that they feel deeply, it is that they begin paying the emotional cost of loving you. That is the proof. Not that they say the right words. Not that they feel strong emotions in private. Not that they return when they are lonely. But that they begin risking the very defenses that once kept them safe in order to build something honest with you. Because when an avoidant starts risking comfort, control, and emotional safety just to remain connected, that is no longer interest. That is no longer convenience. That is no longer an attachment dressed up as intimacy. That is love becoming real. Most people misunderstand what it means when an avoidant pulls away. They assume distance means indifference. Silence means a lack of feeling. Withdrawal means they do not care. But with an avoidant, that interpretation is often too simple, because what looks like disinterest is often self-protection. What looks like detachment is often overwhelm. And what looks like emotional absence is often the moment they feel too much, not too little. That is why the first real proof of genuine love is not how intensely they feel in the beginning. It is not how magnetic they are when things are easy. It is not the chemistry, the attention, or even the vulnerability they show when connection still feels safe. The first real proof comes later. It comes in the moment when closeness stops feeling exciting and starts feeling dangerous. It comes when the emotional stakes rise. It comes when attachment becomes real, because that is the moment an avoidant's deepest pattern activates. That is the moment every instinct inside them says the same thing. Run. Run from the pressure. Run from the expectations. Run from the vulnerability. Run from the possibility of needing someone. Run before you are seen too clearly. Run before you are asked for more than you know how to give. Run before closeness becomes dependence. Run before love becomes something that can hurt you. This is the avoidant reflex. It is not random. It is not dramatic. It is patterned. It is the nervous system moving to restore safety the only way it has learned how, through distance. For an avoidant, distance feels like control. Distance feels like relief. Distance feels like protection. The moment emotions become too intense, too real, too exposing, their instinct is not to lean in. Their instinct is to create space between themselves and the thing they are starting to feel. And this is exactly why staying means everything. Because when an avoidant feels the urge to disappear and chooses not to, something profound is happening inside them. They are not just resisting a habit. They are confronting a survival pattern. They are interrupting an emotional reflex that has protected them for years. And that is not a small act. For most people, staying in connection is normal. For an avoidant, staying when they are triggered can feel like standing still in the middle of emotional danger. So if they stay, pay attention. If they stay when the conversation gets uncomfortable, that matters. If they stay when they feel exposed instead of shutting down completely, that matters. If they feel the familiar instinct to withdraw, to go cold, to disappear for emotional errand instead, they remain present long enough to communicate, regulate, and reconnect. That matters more than almost anything they could say. Because this is where genuine love stops being theory and becomes action. Anyone can be present when connection feels light. Anyone can stay when intimacy is easy, playful, flattering, and low risk. But love is not tested in comfort. Love is revealed in discomfort. Love is revealed when the old pattern gets activated and they have to choose between the defense that protects them and the connection that asks more of them. That is the moment that tells the truth. And when an avoidant chooses to stay, what they are really saying is this: my fear is here, my instinct is screaming, every protective part of me wants distance right now, but I am not leaving. That is not casual. That is not convenience. That is not emotional curiosity. That is effort. That is courage. That is someone choosing connection over conditioning. And for an avoidant, that is one of the clearest forms love can take. because love for them is not proven by intensity. Avoidants can feel intensity and still disappear. They can feel deeply and still detach. They can be overwhelmed by emotion and still retreat into silence. Feeling something is not the proof. Staying with what they feel is the proof. That is the distinction most people miss. The first real sign of genuine love is not that they are emotional. It is that they become accountable to the emotion. They do not just feel the fear, they remain in the room with it. They do not just feel the urge to run, they challenge it. They do not just feel overwhelmed, they learn how to stay present through it instead of making distance their automatic answer. That is not easy for them. It can feel unnatural, exposing, even terrifying. But that is what makes it meaningful. The more difficult staying is for someone, the more significant it becomes when they choose it. So, when an avoidant feels pressure and does what they have always done, that tells you the pattern is still in control. But when they feel pressure, feel fear, feel the full instinct to shut down and disappear and then choose to stay, communicate, and remain emotionally engaged, that is the first undeniable proof that what they feel for you is no longer casual. That is the moment it becomes real. Because the first true evidence of love is not that they never feel the urge to run. It is that they do, and they stay anyway. An avoidant can spend years mastering the art of emotional invisibility. Not because they do not feel, but because they learned long ago that feeling too much without safety comes at a cost. So they adapt. They become difficult to read. They become measured, composed, self-contained. They learn how to function with emotion without revealing it. They learn how to stay close enough to connect, but guarded enough to remain protected. To most people, this can look like calm. It can look like independence. It can even look like strength. But beneath that control is often something far more fragile. A person who has built their entire emotional life around not being fully seen. That is why one of the clearest signs an avoidant feels genuine love is not that they become more expressive in some dramatic, obvious way. It is that they begin allowing you access to what they normally keep hidden from everyone else. And that changes everything. Because what an avoidant hides is not just emotion, it is the most unguarded parts of themselves, the uncertainty, the fear, the insecurity, the need, the tenderness, the shame, the confusion, the part of them that does not know how to be close without feeling exposed. These are not casual disclosures for an avoidant. These are protected emotional territories. These are the inner rooms they've spent years locking, organizing, and keeping off limits. Most people never get access to those rooms. Most people meet the composed version, the capable version, the version that knows how to stay in control, how to stay unreadable, how to stay emotionally intact, no matter what is happening beneath the surface. That is the self they trust. That is the self they know how to protect. And because of that, many avoidants can move through relationships appearing present while remaining deeply defended. They can be affectionate without being transparent, caring without being exposed, connected without being fully known. But genuine love begins to disrupt that system, because love creates a problem for avoidance. It increases emotional stakes. It deepens attachment. It makes distance harder to maintain without consequence. And eventually, if what they feel is real, the cost of staying hidden becomes greater than the fear of being seen. That is when something rare begins to happen. They start showing you what they normally conceal. Not all at once, not perfectly, not in some cinematic moment where every wall disappears. Usually it happens in fragments. A hesitation that reveals fear. A confession they almost do not say. A moment of softness they cannot fully disguise. A truth that slips through their usual control. They tell you they are overwhelmed. They admit they do not know what to do with what they feel. They reveal that they are scared of needing you. They let you see that distance is not always disinterested, is often fear, confusion, or emotional overload. That is not weakness. That is trust. And for an avoidant, trust is one of the deepest forms love can take, because trust for them is not simply believing you like them. It is believing they can be emotionally exposed in front of you and survive it. It is believing they can reveal something unpolished, uncertain, needy, hurt, or deeply human and not be punished for it. It is believing they can let the mask slip and still be safe in the connection. That is a profound emotional risk. And risk is what makes it real. When an avoidant lets you see their pain instead of hiding behind detachment, that is risk. When they let you see their insecurity instead of performing indifference, that is risk. When they admit that they care, that they are affected, that they are more attached than they wanted to be, that is risk. When they stop trying to look untouched and allow you to witness what this connection is actually stirring inside them, that is not emotional weakness. That is emotional exposure. And emotional exposure is one of the purest signs that what they feel has become real. Because people do not reveal what they are protecting unless something matters enough to challenge the protection. That is the truth most people miss. An avoidant does not prove love by becoming someone radically different overnight. They prove it by slowly allowing access to the parts of themselves they have spent years defending. They let you see what hurts. They let you see what scares them. They let you see what they need but do not know how to ask for. They let you see the conflict between wanting closeness and fearing what closeness can do. And in doing that, they are offering something far more meaningful than polished affection. They are offering access. Access to what is real. Access to what is vulnerable. Access to what they do not show the world. That is not casual. That is not performance. That is not something an avoidant gives lightly. That is intimacy. And when an avoidant begins letting you see what they have spent most of their life hiding, you are no longer just being let into their attention. You are being let into their truth. And for someone who has spent years surviving by staying unreadable, being seen like that is one of the clearest signs of genuine love there is. An avoidant does not usually fear connection itself. What they fear is what connection takes from them. The loss of control. The loss of space, the loss of emotional certainty. To someone with avoidant patterns, closeness can feel less like comfort and more like exposure. The deeper the connection becomes, the more it threatens the one thing they have spent years building their identity around: control. Control over their emotions, control over their needs, control over how much access anyone has to them. Control is not just a preference for an avoidant. It is often the strategy that made closeness feel survivable. That is why one of the clearest signs an avoidant feels genuine love is not that they suddenly become effortless with intimacy. It is that they begin choosing connection over control. And for them, that is everything. Because avoidants do not usually manage relationships through honesty first. They manage them through distance, through pacing, through silence, through emotional regulation that often looks like withdrawal. They create safety by controlling access. If something feels too intense, they pull back. If something feels too vulnerable, they shut down. If something feels emotionally demanding, they delay, detach, or disappear long enough to regain internal control. This is not always cruelty. It is often self-protection. It is the learned belief that if they can control the distance, they can control the risk. And for a long time, that strategy works. It allows them to stay involved without feeling consumed. It allows them to experience connection without fully surrendering to it. It allows them to care while still maintaining the emotional upper hand. But genuine love begins to challenge that system, because real intimacy cannot grow where control is always more important than connection. That is where the shift begins. When an avoidant starts choosing connection over control, They stop treating distance as their first language. They begin doing the harder thing, the riskier thing, the more honest thing. Instead of disappearing to regain control, they communicate. Instead of shutting down to avoid exposure, they stay present long enough to tell the truth. Instead of using silence to regulate the relationship, they begin using honesty. That is not a small adjustment. That is a complete change in emotional strategy. Because for an avoidant, control feels safe precisely because it creates distance between them and emotional uncertainty. Connection does the opposite. Connection asks them to stay in what they cannot fully manage. It asks them to tolerate ambiguity, vulnerability, emotional need, and the possibility of being affected by someone they cannot control. That is deeply uncomfortable for someone who has learned to survive by staying emotionally self-contained, which is exactly why it matters so much when they begin choosing it. When they tell you what they are feeling instead of making you guess, that is connection over control. When they admit they need space without disappearing, that is connection over control. When they stay in a difficult conversation instead of retreating into silence, that is connection over control. When they stop using emotional distance to regain power and start using communication to preserve closeness, that is connection over control. And that is one of the clearest signs love is becoming real. Because control keeps them protected. Connection makes them vulnerable. Control lets them stay untouchable. Connection lets them be affected. Control allows them to manage the relationship without fully participating in it. Connection asks them to show up honestly, imperfectly, and without the same guarantees of emotional safety. That is why this shift matters more than grand gestures ever could. Anyone can create intensity. Anyone can offer affection in moments that feel easy. Anyone can be warm when nothing difficult is being asked of them. But when an avoidant begins surrendering the strategies that once kept them emotionally protected in order to create something more honest with you, they begin to open up and be more vulnerable.
That is not attraction. That is not convenience.
That is emotional investment. An emotional investment always reveals itself in behavior, not in what they promise. In what they begin changing. They stop controlling closeness through unpredictability. They stop creating confusion just to preserve distance. They stop relying on silence to avoid accountability. They stop treating emotional access like something that must always be rationed to stay safe. Instead, they begin participating more openly, more honestly, more consistently, not perfectly, but intentionally. And that intention is what matters. Because an avoidant choosing connection over control does not mean they stop feeling fear. It means fear is no longer making every decision. It means the instinct to withdraw is still there, but it is no longer automatic. It means they are beginning to value the relationship more than the defenses that once protected them from it. That is the shift. That is the proof. Not that they become fearless. Not that intimacy suddenly becomes easy. But that they stop organizing the relationship around self-protection and start organizing it around truth.